Shortly after becoming the first former president to be found guilty on felony charges, Donald Trump kicked off a long, meandering news conference with a familiar refrain.
It was a rigged trial. This is a scam. There's a rigged trial. Everybody saw it was a rigged deal. It was a rigged trial.
Rigged. It's become Trump's go-to response to anything and everything that does not go his way. But the reality is Donald Trump isn't upset because the trial against him was rigged. He's upset because it wasn't. As Adam Serwer writes in The Atlantic, quote, Trump is decrying not a corrupt individual or rigged process, but a person or process that is not corrupt or rigged enough to give him the results that he seeks. Thursday's guilty verdict was handed down by a jury of the ex-president's peers following weeks of evidence and arguments from both sides. That's not a rigged result. That's the American justice system at work. But you know what does sound like rigging to me? House Speaker Mike Johnson urging the conservative majority Supreme Court to overturn Trump's conviction.
I do believe the Supreme Court should step in. Obviously, this is totally unprecedented, and it's dangerous to our system. I think that the justices on the court, I know many of them personally, I think they're deeply concerned about that as we are. So I think they'll set this straight.
And just moments ago, Trump got in on the action, calling on the Supreme Court to intervene. Remember, the court, 1/3 of which is made up of Trump appointees, is currently considering his claim of absolute immunity. And with each day that passes, the far-right court only aids Trump's desperate desire to delay that trial further. There's also the classified documents case, which is indefinitely postponed by another Trump appointee, Judge Aileen Cannon. As Serwer writes, this gamesmanship from Trump-appointed justices and judges, quote, bears far more resemblance to a corrupt or rigged process than a trial by a jury of one's peers does. So as it turns out, a jury of Trump's peers seems to be the only institution that has provided itself, or proved itself rather, resistant to the ex-president's corrupting influence. And if Trump and his appointees are successful in delaying any other quests for accountability until after the election, it will again be the American people who decide the ex-president's fate, this time at the ballot box come November. Let's bring in my panel for this hour. Mehdi Hasan, editor-in-chief at Zeteo. Danielle Moody, host of the Woke AF Daily podcast and co-host of the Democracy-ish and the New Abnormal podcast. Also joining us, Ian Millhiser, senior correspondent at Vox and author of The Agenda, How a Republican Supreme Court is Reshaping America. Mehdi, my good friend, it's great to see you again. I'll start with you this hour. And despite Donald Trump ranting about a rigged trial, the truth of the matter is he was actually treated better than most defendants. You had Justice Juan Merchan practically bending over backwards to overlook his courtroom antics and social media harassment, his commentary against the judge, the witnesses, everybody, you name it. What do you make of the ex-president's ever-persistent victim complex here?
Ayman, good to be back. Look, you're right. He was treated better, not worse than other people. None of us would have gotten away with his courtroom antics. None of us would have gotten away with, 10 violations of the gag order. It's absurd to say that he was treated worse. Look, when he says rigged all the time, the reality is he's a loser, right? This is him losing. He doesn't like being a loser, which is what he fundamentally is. So whenever he loses, he says it's rigged. I'm sure when he was a kid and he lost any games, he said it was rigged as well. When he lost the Iowa caucus in 2016 to Ted Cruz, he said it was rigged. When he lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton in 2016, he said it was rigged. When he lost the Electoral College vote and the popular vote to Joe Biden in 2020, he says it's rigged. And now, of course, he loses unanimously to a jury of his, well, I don't want to call them peers because they're surely better than him, as are most Americans. But he says it's rigged again, and it's absurd. I mean, 12 New Yorkers found him guilty in pretty rapid time. One of them, I believe, even gets most of their news from Truth Social, and they found him guilty. So this is, as you say, this is the American justice system at play. This is the world's biggest loser, biggest man-child, unable to deal with defeat, both at the ballot box and in a jury. And look, I would say to people, especially on the left, some of my friends on the left who are a little bit complacent about the return of Donald Trump next year, the idea that A, he's going to accept defeat, in November is absurd. There's nothing in his nature that says he's going to accept defeat. And if he wins, there's nothing that says he's going to go quietly in 2020 and accept 2 terms. Nothing about this man says he accepts anything that makes him a loser.
Yeah, no, it's an absolutely important point about the history of using that word rig, Danielle. And to Maggie's point, you had this new piece in the Washington Post from Philip Bump, who kind of looks into the use of the word rigged with Donald Trump. Bump writes, quote, "He says everything was rigged all the time with a frequency that would make a parrot feel a bit embarrassed at how often it was repeating itself." And to Maggie's point, we've become kind of used to this language from Trump, but the frequency doesn't make it any less harmful to our democracy. We've kind of fallen into this trap of saying, oh, he's just saying that he's not going to accept the results. But then we see people like Tim Scott and others also say they are not going to accept the results of the election in November.
I mean, the reality is that the repetitive nature is strategic, right? We all know that when you say things multiple times on television, whether you're streaming or watching it on a cable news program, if you say it over and over again, it starts to get into people's psyche. And that is the point. The point is to plant a seed of reasonable doubt, as you would say in the courtroom, about whether or not everything is rigged against Donald Trump. I don't know how that's possible, given the fact that he was born with a platinum spoon in his mouth and he was given $1 million to start a business that he bankrupted, like he does most things, right? And so the fact is that you're using this word rigged. It's parroted by the entirety of the Republican Party every time that they're on television, which then places doubt in people's minds, in the minds of independent voters and in the minds of some of those people that are thinking to themselves, you know what? I never thought I would vote for a felon. I don't want to start now. And so I think that it's really important for Democrats on the other side to be able to say that you have a choice in this election. Do you want somebody that has been found guilty on 34 felony counts, or do you want somebody that shows up for patriotism? Do you want a man that is now an alleged rapist and was found guilty of that, or do you want somebody that actually believes in the Constitution and the rule of law? This party has shown themselves that they do not. They are a cult. They show up in the same outfits, right? And they parrot the same talking points.
Yeah, you had Tom Cotton today refer to the trial in New York as rigged because of Judge Merchan. And the interesting thing, Ian, is that you heard Speaker Johnson in that clip I played earlier a few moments ago, calling on the Supreme Court openly, brazenly to intervene. He not even waiting for an appeals process to play out. He's since tried to clean those comments up. Listen.
I haven't had conversations with the justices. I just know their character, their personality. I know what they've said in the past. They are deeply concerned, as we are, about maintaining our system of justice. They are concerned about maintaining that idea. We all are, because it's a necessary ingredient to keep a constitutional republic. That's what I was referring to. I think they're concerned about using courtrooms for politics and political retribution. We all are.
So apparently Speaker Mike Johnson now has a new job as the spokesperson for the Supreme Court justice, which I don't know. He's kind of making bold statements that he knows that they are concerned about this. Is that your perception on this far right court, that they are deeply concerned with maintaining the system of justice?
I guess I agree with half of what the speaker just said. I do think that there are probably many justices, at least 2 on the Supreme Court, who are very, very concerned that the leader of their political party was found guilty of a felony, and who are very, very interested in lifting that stigma from the leader of their political party. I mean, we've had 3 weeks now of conversation about the flags in front of Sam Alito's homes. And honestly, I don't even think the flags would be such a big deal if it wasn't for the fact that I've covered him on the court for 12 years, and he always votes with the Republican Party. You know, there's no nuance there. You know, we've seen Clarence Thomas and his billionaires. You know, I don't know for sure. And I mean, I want to be clear. I don't know if there are 5 votes on this Supreme Court to say, well, we don't want Donald Trump to be a convicted felon because that means that our party won't win the election. But I know for a fact there aren't 0 votes on the Supreme Court who think that. I mean, our courts as a whole have just become far too politicized.
Maggie, Speaker Johnson says that he is concerned about using courtrooms for politics and political retribution. I mean, it's always projection with these guys. This guy literally went to held a press conference in front of Trump's Manhattan trial, dressed in a bright red tie to project MAGA to the world?
I should say, given Danielle and you have both pointed out that the cultists in MAGA turned up outside the courtroom in matching clothes, I should point out to your viewers that you and I did not coordinate our jacket and shirt today at all, Ayman. I don't want anyone to think I'm part of the Ayman Muhyiddin cult, as much as I love you, brother. I just noticed that, there you go. Look, on the issue of projection, the Republican Party is the master. The projection doesn't do it justice. Hypocrisy doesn't do it justice. This is an entire political movement that came to power on the basis of lock her up. That then once coming to power on the basis of lock her up, Donald Trump, and I'm sorry I have such a long memory to, all the way back to 2018, Trump posted a picture on Twitter of a bunch of Democrats and his own Deputy Attorney General at the time, Rod Rosenstein, behind bars. Right. He had pictures of Bill and Hillary and Obama and Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder. They're all behind bars. This was the sitting president of the United States. Can you imagine if Joe Biden posted a picture today of Mike Johnson and all these Republicans behind bars? The world would lose their... You know what they'd lose. So this is the irony here, that this party is based on locking people up to the point where they want to lock up Anthony Fauci for trying to prevent a pandemic. They want to lock up everyone. And then you can't kind of blame them, Ayman, because they think in that mindset. So they think everyone else is like them. So part of me doesn't blame them. In their heads, they probably think, yes, this is the Democrats trying to do to us what we do to them, when ironically, Joe Biden has gone out of his way to not be involved in this trial. In fact, there are Democrats urging Biden, and I'm going to urge the president tonight, to actually speak more about Trump's criminal conviction. Joe Biden should be posting on Twitter every morning and every night, my opponent is a convicted felon. 9 a.m., 9 p.m., he should just schedule the tweets for the next 6 months. But he doesn't. He goes out of his way to stay above the fray. So the great irony of this party that's all about locking people up, accusing Democrats of doing to them. As I say, irony, projection, hypocrisy, we don't have the words for it.
All right, panel, don't go anywhere. Please stick around. Up next, there's yet another Supreme Court flag controversy to talk about, including the bizarre choice by Justice Alito to blame his wife.
When anyone in this house wears white, it doesn't stay white for long. White to soccer?
I'm not gonna slide tackle.
But now with Tide Oxy White, we can clean our white clothes without using bleach. Even works on colors.
I slide tackled.
I see that.
It's got to be Tide.
Grandpa and I used to work on this together. I've never seen a man love something so much. And when I'm gone, I want you to have it.
Seriously? Doesn't count. What you need is a will. Luckily, Trust and Will makes it easy. For as low as $199, you can quickly create a state-specific, legally valid document that actually counts. 10 and 2, boss. Start your will at trustandwill.com and make it count.
Are you certain you can fix that?
Yeah, clip here and there.
Are you for imprint certain?
Certainty matters, like the certainty of Lisa, Joshua, Robin, Haley, and Josh. 4imprint promo product experts dedicated to working with you, for you, every step of the way. Make certain your logo, your organization, and you shine. That's the certainty of 4imprint.com.
4imprint, for certain. Liberty Mutual customized my car insurance and I saved hundreds.
That's great.
I know, I've been telling everyone.
Liberty. Liberty. How many people did you tell?
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, liberty, liberty. Liberty.
This is a story about the one who keeps it all moving. He is measured, precise. He thinks ahead, stocks the right parts, and knows just where to find them. Because for the one, this facility is about more than business. The industrial-grade products you need delivered fast. Call, click Grainger.com or stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
An alternative to pills, Voltaren is a clinically proven arthritis pain relief gel which penetrates deep to target the source of pain with non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medicine directly at the source. Voltaren, the joy of movement.
Homa Glow showed up right on time and did my dishes, my laundry, they even cleaned my windows. I love that you just pick a date, pick a cleaner, and enjoy a spotless house for $19.
We went with the website nuts.com because nuts and dried fruit and pretzels and trail mix and gummies and chocolate and espresso beans and malted milk balls and crackers and popcorn and sesame sticks and veggie chips and energy squares and fudge and jelly beans and seeds and rock candy and saltwater taffy and dried berries and fruit leather and bars and jerky and a whole lot more .com was already taken. Get 20% off and free shipping on your first order at nuts.com. Yes, we have more than nuts, but still the website is just nuts.com.
Hi. Deprioritized. But it's a work call. Oh, a work call? Deprioritized.
T-Mobile home internet relies on cell phone towers, so when their network gets busy,
Not the fridge, come on.
you can be deprioritized.
It's too bad. It's a good movie.
Yeah.
Forget T-Mobile cell phone internet. Get home internet that puts you first. Get Spectrum.
Hi. Deprioritized. But it's a work call. Oh, a work call? Deprioritized.
T-Mobile home internet relies on cell phone towers, so when their network gets busy,
Not the fridge, come on.
you can be deprioritized.
It's too bad. It's a good movie.
Yeah.
Forget T-Mobile cell phone internet. Get home internet that puts you first. Get Spectrum.
My wife is fond of flying flags. I am not. That gem of a quote from Samuel Alito is an excuse, a deflection, a masterclass on the blame game. Call it what you will, but it's clear that the conservative Supreme Court justice is not taking any responsibility for what many experts are calling a massive violation of judicial ethics. On Wednesday, Alito refused to recuse himself from 2 pending cases involving Donald Trump and the Capitol attack. Instead, in a letter to lawmakers who called for his recusal, he put the blame on his wife. He is referring to 2 incidents recently reported by the New York Times. One went down in 2021 after the January 6th attack and before Biden's inauguration. Alito's Virginia home displayed an upside-down flag, a known symbol for the Stop This Steal movement. In a second instance, a provocative flag associated with the Christian nationalist movement and the big lie was hoisted outside their vacation house in New Jersey. Alito argues that he does not meet the conditions for recusal. And here's the thing. The court's code of conduct gives justices themselves the final say on whether they take themselves off of certain cases, making the ethics rules virtually unenforceable. And in the case of Alito, he's proved over and over and over again that he is the Republican Party's man inside the Supreme Court. Ian Millhiser summed it up perfectly for Vox, saying, quote, Alito, a judge with no theory of the Constitution and no insight into how judges should read ambiguous laws beyond his driving belief that his team should always win, is the perfect fit for what the Republican Party has become in the age of Trump. My panel, including the man who wrote that piece, is back with me. Ian, it was a great piece, and I want to kind of just pick on it a little bit, pick from it if I could. You recently argued in a piece for Vox headline, quote, Alito says the Supreme Court's fake ethics code allows him to be unethical. What does Alito's argument highlight about the Supreme Court's code of conduct? What does it actually expose?
Yeah, I mean, about a year ago, they released this ethics code to some fanfare. It was the first time they'd ever released an ethics code before. And now what we know is 2 things. We know that the ethics code is actually weaker than their obligations under a federal statute. He cited a provision of the ethics code which says that there's a presumption against recusal. That is not what the federal statute says. And then the other thing that we know about it is again, it's just unenforceable. They are the ones who get to decide whether or not they're going to follow the code. You know, the problem I have with Alito, I mean, his own description of why these flags went up is so embarrassing to himself and his wife that I'm actually inclined to believe him, because who would admit to that? The problem is his record on the court. You know, he is the most pro-prosecution justice, except when the defendant is Donald Trump or a January 6th defendant. His record has been so consistently partisan that at some point you just look at the whole thing and the whole thing oozes appearance of impropriety.
And Mahdi, Justice Alito argued that he had nothing to do with the flying of the flags. And again, not to sound like a broken record, the irony of him saying that it was his wife, and his wife has the right to choose whatever she does with those flags. What do you make of his arguments for not recusing himself and putting the blame solely on his wife, and somehow like the perception of what happens in that household is not supposed to be an indicator for why he should be recusing himself?
You got to love the party of family values where they always throw the wife under the bus. It's not the first Supreme Court justice to do so. Of course, Clarence Thomas, with Ginny Thomas, another justice who should be impeached, if not, look, they blame the wives, fine, whatever. But I would say in response to Ian, I mean, Samuel Alito is a long-time liar. Right? He has lied for many, many years. If you read Ted Kennedy's diary from 2006, when Alito was being confirmed, he went to Ted Kennedy and said, I will never vote to overturn Roe. This is the man who authored the Dobbs decision. He lied at the time, and Kennedy didn't vote for him, unlike a lot of other Democrats who line up and vote for Republican judges. He lied about every aspect of this flag story. He said that this was a result of a neighbor fighting with his wife about Trump and using the F word. That altercation came in February 2001. The flag was spotted in January 2001. He said the flag was put up because people were putting F Trump yard signs near a school bus pickup where kids could see it. Actually, schools were closed in Fairfax County in January 2001 because of the pandemic. And he lied when he said it's all about his neighbors, because then we found another flag, the Christian nationalist flag, at his home in New Jersey in 2023. Who's he going to blame that one on? His wife? The neighbor? We don't know. But it seems that he has an affinity for these flags that suggest he supports Christian nationalism, that suggest he supports insurrection, that suggest he supports Trump. The idea that he is going to rule in the Trump immunity case is absurd. It's an insult to our intelligence. It's an undermining of our democracy and our justice system. And it's a reminder of how feckless Senate Democrats are. Dick Durbin holds the gavel on the Senate Judiciary Committee. When asked last week, will he hold hearings into Justice Alito, he said, I don't think there's much to be gained from hearings. Are you kidding me? What? There's so much to be gained, holding a justice to account. How about holding the entire Supreme Court to account? How about getting Republicans to defend Trump and insurrection one more time? It's just absurd that even when Democrats are in charge, they cannot hold this radical, right-wing, reactionary, pro-insurrection, pro-Trump Supreme Court to account. I just want to pull my hair out.
Yeah, and I was going to say to that point, Danielle, that Mahdi just brought up, the Democrats are simply not doing enough, maybe not even doing anything really then besides a letter asking them to recuse themselves, both Justice Alito and at one point Clarence Thomas. But then there's no follow-up. There's no pressure. There's no comment from the president to come out and really use his position to bring about some act, some responsibility to the Supreme Court in violation of what I think most respected legal experts in this country would agree is unethical behavior.
I mean, the fact is that this is what Democrats do. Is the reason why Alito and other Republicans act in the manners that they do is because they know that Democrats aren't going to do anything about it, because they're more afraid of appearance than they are on actually prosecuting the case, which is that Republicans sitting on this Supreme Court are either grifting outright, just taking money from billionaire sugar daddies, or they're flying flags. Because I want people to understand, if, for instance, and I'm not trying to equate the two at all, but if one of the quote unquote liberal justices were to be flying a Black Lives Matter flag at their home, or a LGBTQ pride flag, as it's Pride Month right now, in front of their home, what do you think that Fox News and MAGA would be doing? Right? And unfortunately, what I believe is that Democrats would get on their bandwagon and say that those justices need to recuse themselves or they need to step down. Because the fact of the matter is that even in this day and age, when we know that Donald Trump, vis-a-vis this recent court case, right, lied to the American people, right, lied about his character, paid off a porn star, right, and was able to appoint 3 justices, we're still not talking about how important the courts are. We're still not using this as an opportunity, which is what a hearing is. It's an opportunity to tell a narrative to the American people. And in this point, they want to send a letter? Give me a break, right? There's an opportunity here, and they're missing it.
You made such a good point, Danielle, that I got to get Ian's thoughts on this, because as a journalist covering the Supreme Court, I want to know what you think about this. The New York Times, after the New York Times published its report on this scandal, the Washington Post acknowledged that it actually had learned about the flag controversy at the time more than 3 years ago. then deciding not to report on it because the flag raising appeared to be the work of Alito's wife, Martha Ann Alito, and connected to a dispute with her neighbors, according to a Post spokeswoman. Ben Smith called the move cautious and deferential and very pre-Dobbs. I'm curious to get your thoughts, somebody who covers the Supreme Court. What do you make of that decision? And do you agree with that assessment of the Post's editorial approach as deferential to the justices?
So I think that reporters are responding to how the public attitude towards the court has shifted. And like I described myself here as well. A lot of the scandals that ProPublica reported about Clarence Thomas, I reported on and other people reported on in 2011. And when I reported on them in 2011, I borrowed from a lot of reporting that was done in 2004. So, like, a lot of these scandals have been known for a really long time. What has changed is after the shenanigans that Republicans engaged in order to make sure that they had a majority on the Supreme Court. You know, remember Merrick Garland?
Right.
You know, after the Dobbs decision, after the court has shown itself to be this very partisan, very political figure, I think that there is an appetite not just for, okay, what did the decision that they hand down today sort of journalism, but there's an appetite for political scandal journalism. There's an appetite for covering the justices as if they are members of Congress, as if they are any other political figure. I think that's a good thing, but it's also a new thing. I mean, like I said, I reported a lot of this stuff 12 years ago, and it went away. It's not going away now.
All right, we're going to have to leave it at that. Ian Millhiser, Danielle Moody, Mahdi Hassan. It's great to see all three of you. Mahdi, next time, the pocket square, my friend. If you're going to dress like us on the show, you got to have the...
Missed it. Next time, we'll just both wear red ties.
Sounds good. All right, great to see you. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Time and time again, Israel...